Burnett Seminar for Academic Achievement. It's exciting to have such a great turnout on what a great November day. Aren't we happy this wasn't yesterday? Right? My name is Teresa Laurie Maitland, and I am the coordinator of the Academic Success Program for students with LD and ADD here at UNC, and our program is part of the Learning Center. And I welcome you. I'd like to get a show of hands. How many people are here for the first time? Wow, we have recruited some new folks. For those of you who are new, let me share a little bit of history about how this event got started. In the late 1990s, there were several friends of students with LD and ADD in North Carolina who wanted to sponsor an event that would do something special and continue to keep on giving. Mr. Burnett, for whom the seminar is named, his mother, Juliet Davis, and her late husband, Burke Davis, wanted to give a gift to our program that would have an impact. And their vision and their commitment allows us to all be here today. This event was created for the people who have these differences so that they could hear the best practices in the field, and we would be in a position to bring the people that we read about to inspire and educate all of us. I'd like you to join me. I'm going to ask Mr. and Mrs. Burnett to stand up, and I'd like you to join me in thanking them for allowing this to happen. Yes. We're also very fortunate at UNC to have administrators who understand the importance of having services for students of all types, and also committed staff who give 100% of themselves on a daily basis to provide support to all students on this campus. I'm going to introduce all of them so that you can see who they are, and during the break or at the end of the seminar, feel free to approach any of us and ask any questions you may have. First, the Dean of, Senior Associate Dean of Undergraduate Education, Bobby Owen. And as people stand, I'm going to introduce them and then they can have a seat. Dean Owen oversees undergraduate education, which consists of a range of services, scholarships, and programs for all undergraduate students. And we want to notice that Dean Owen has always been a supporter of students with LD and ADHD since programs began on this campus in the mid-'80s. We also want to introduce Dean Harold Woodard. Dean Woodard is the Associate Dean and the Director of the Center for Student Success and Academic Counseling, which is an umbrella organization that incorporates a range of services on our campus for all students. It includes the Learning Center, the Writing Center, the Academic Support Program for Student Athletes, our Summer Bridge Program, and the Office of Student and Academic Counseling. I'd like to introduce Mary Willingham, who is the Assistant Director of the Center, and she also functions as an academic counselor working one-on-one with students and in groups. Dr. Martha Keever could not be here today. She is the director of our Learning Center, but I will introduce Mr. Frank Kessler, who is the assistant director of the Learning Center. We've written a little bit in your program about the various services the Learning Center offers. If you want more information, we also have brochures out at the registration desk. Ms. Christina Perry is a staff member of the Learning Center, and she coordinates the tutoring programs. Ms. Kristen Rademacher, who is a colleague who coordinates the Academic Success Program with me and functions as an LD ADHD specialist. Mrs. Billy Shambly, who is in the back of the room, is the program assistant administrator for the Learning Center and the Academic Success Program, and she has played a vital role as our liaison with the staff at the General Alumni Association in coordinating this event. We also have some friends from sister organizations, Dr. Kim Abels and Dr. Vicki Behrens. Are they in the house? All right. Our Writing Center staff will be here. Is Mr. Jim Kessler in the house? All right. I do want to acknowledge the folks from the General Alumni Association, Rick Davis, Steffi Kenton, and Anne-Louise Aguirre, who have played a pivotal role in the success of today's event, in the marketing, in the organization, and truly without them, this could not happen. I want to just mention briefly how the day is going to go and just some housekeeping things. The program that we've created for you indicates that after December 1st, a video of Dr. Ratey's presentation will be on iTunes U, and he has given us permission to also post his PowerPoint slides. Today's session, as you see, will be divided into 2 parts, and we'll have a break. And during that break, we have great refreshments, and we also have a book table in the back. If you look at the back of your program, it lists all of Dr. Ratey's books and some other related books that are on sale at the back of the auditorium, and thanks to John Williams and his staff from the Bull's Head Bookstore. We also will want your feedback at the end of the session. We have created and revised our program based on your feedback, so if you'll please take a moment before you leave today. And if you do have a cell phone and you haven't put it on silent, we'd ask you to do that now. And now, on to the main reason we are all sitting in this auditorium today. Before I read Dr. Ratey's formal biography, let me share with you my observations of the significant impact he has on our field and on individuals with these differences. Many professionals I know, and they are sitting in the audience, refer to Dr. Ratey's work, the Driven to Distraction series, as the ultimate guide and resource. And whenever they diagnose new individuals with these differences, that is the #1 recommendation they give, is to get the book Driven to Distraction. Many of the individuals who have these differences know how profound the impact can be in just reading that book. Some of you in the audience know what I mean. Not a week goes by where a student doesn't tell me that reading that book changed their lives. It allowed them to respect themselves, understand this difference, and actually, more importantly, because Dr. Ratey and his colleague, Dr. Hallowell, acknowledge that they too have ADHD, it gives individuals inspiration and it uplifts them because they see 2 individuals who are change agents in this world parlaying those differences into gifts. So formally, as many of you already know, Dr. John Ratey is the Associate Clinical Professor of Psychiatry at the Harvard Medical School. He is a research synthesizer, a speaker and an author, as well as a clinical psychiatrist maintaining a full private practice in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He has lectured and published. He has published over 60 peer-reviewed articles on the topics of aggression, autism, ADHD, and other issues in neuropsychiatry. Dr. Ratey has authored A User's Guide to the Brain and co-authored The Shadow Syndromes. As I mentioned before, from 1994 to 2005, he co-authored with Dr. Ned Hallowell, Driven to Distraction, Answers to Distraction, and Delivered from Distraction. He's also edited several books, including The Psychiatry of Personality Disorders. Each year since 1995, Dr. Ratey has been selected by his peers as one of the best doctors in America. In his dedication to changing the world, he has founded the Ratey Institute, whose mission is to broadcast life-changing science and establish best practices, first in our schools and then in other organizations in our society. His latest book, Spark, The Revolutionary New Science of Exercise in the Brain, which is the foundation of his talk today, was published in 2008 and is the culmination of years of experience with body-brain connections, new research data, and synthesizes all of the biological sciences in a way that even I understood. Spark is revolutionizing how people understand the human species. At a time when budgets are being cut and healthcare costs are rising, Dr. Ratey reminds us that as individuals and as systems, we can implement low-cost, almost no-cost, simple interventions that can have a profound impact on our life, how we feel, and most importantly, on how we learn. It is my privilege to introduce to you Dr. John Ratey.
No, it's true. Do you know you're 7% better when you're standing than when you're sitting in terms of your brain function? A little more aroused, a little more alert. It's one of the things we're teaching teachers now is when their kids are popping out of the chair, it might not be a good idea to have them sit down because they might be popping up for a reason to try and control their brains. But anyway, and moving adds a little more juice to your brain because our muscles are connected to our brain, which you'll see. Anyway, Jack's introducing two of my websites. One is johnratey.com, where there's a lot of information before the past year or so, and we've just started a nonprofit organization called Sparking Life, and have this wonderful website, sparkinglife.org, which we just launched, which we think is going to be the centerpiece of trying to keep everyone current on the basic science of what exercise does in the brain, trying to make it understandable for everybody to access, understand, and use. Also, it will hopefully will lead the way in changing physical education, changing it first by getting it back into the schools, but also changing its direction, as you'll hear. And also looking at programs around the country that have been successful and people whose lives have been changed by exercise. So we're really trying to promote the fact that exercise in fact is medicine, but it's medicine for the brain. And people don't remember that. And Sparking Life is the website, and it just was launched, and it's a nonprofit, and we're looking for sponsors. So if you're interested, go to the website. But I have 4 PhDs who are volunteering their time already with me to gather information, gather material, to push, because we need a push, because our culture has changed, the whole civilization has changed, and we're in the midst of it, and we're in the midst of not just an obesity crisis, but a sedentary crisis. And this is the problem. We are hunter-gatherers, okay? It's only been 5,000 to 10,000 years that we weren't running around the plains and the savannas and moving back then, on average, of 10 to 14 miles a day, on average. Foraging, moving from place to place, from hunting field to hunting field, to berry patch to berry patch, sprinting sometimes, running away, moving. We were lifting all the time, so there was no strength training, and there was no training for marathons. You don't see hunter-gatherer populations working out, because that's part of the deal. And so our genes are still with us. Our genes don't change all that much in 10,000 years. And especially in the last 30 to 40 years, things have changed around us big time. Big time. When I was a child, which is a long time ago, and my parents, watching them, they never sat down. We never sat down. Now all we're doing is sitting. Last year, the study came out from the CDC that we adults are sitting in front of a computer, or sitting in front of one screen or another, for 9.5 hours a day. The Kaiser Foundation study came out this past year looking at children. From 2004 to 2009, which is only 5 years, right? And we had lots of screens before that, but now the average child is sitting in front of a screen for 7.5 hours a day. That's up an hour and a half from 2004, from 6 to 7.5 hours a day, texting, taking in information with our wonderful cell phones and all that, our Androids and iPhones and computers and TV screens. We are sitting, and this is the cause of so many problems. Now, I'll mention briefly just about the obesity crisis, because this impacts attention problems and learning disabilities as a whole. We also carried with us from the hunter-gatherer period a bunch of genes that we call the thrifty genes. Thrifty, because it makes us thrifty, because we might not find food tomorrow. We might be starving for a couple of weeks. We might have to move 100 miles or so before we find more food. So Our thrifty genes drive us to do two things. One, eat the highest caloric food that we can find. That's your basic 5-stack and Burger King. And two, conserve it, like our friend here. That is, we store it and conserve it because that's what we're driven to do. And this is really the root cause of our obesity crisis today, because what grew up around us is this wonderful world that everything is taken care of by a click or by a keystroke. And this is, and will remain a problem until we're aware of it and we do something about it. And especially for people with learning problems, because their brains need to be hyped up all the time. They need to be on more than even their fellows who don't have ADD or other learning issues. I only have a few brain slides, so bear with me. Now, as we evolved, this part of the brain, the front part of the brain, is the part of the brain that grew. When we want to talk about evolved, I mean 400,000 years of evolution before 10,000 years ago. This part of the brain grew. And this part of the brain grew to help us be better movers, more accurate, more planful, more organized, more thoughtful. And from that part of the brain developed our thinking brain to allow us to abstract things, to expand our working memory a bit. And this is the part of the brain that we have studied so much in ADHD, because it's the area that seems like it's a little bit off. It's a little sleepy. It's not turned on all the time. That part of the brain that develops last, which we call the house of the executive functioning, or the CEO of the brain. That part which makes us most human, because it allows us to think and to plan and to write poetry and to appreciate nature and appreciate art, etc. And this part of the brain is not always turned on, but it really grew out of our need and our need to move better, more planfully. And this hard-edged neuroscientist said years ago now that which we call thinking is really the evolutionary internalization of movement. And we miss that because we're immersed in such a sedentary world. And just a few more issues about obesity, because it is so tied into learning problems. This is a study that came out in 2006 out of the University of Florida, where they looked at 18 children who are represented in this green box here, and followed them as they developed through the course of their childhood. Got them at the age of 4, and they got in the green box if their ideal weight was 150% of normal, meaning that they were morbidly obese. They compared them to their normal weight siblings. Their normal weight siblings, which they had 24 of at the time, and looked and did the same thing, looked for any problems, looked at their IQs, and what they found, that there was a 30-point difference in their IQ points over the course of their development. Okay? Since then, this past year, they've more than doubled the numbers in each category. And the differences remain. And this was done by the Department of Medical Genetics, so they ruled out every genetic possibility that they could find. All that was different was obviously the eating and lack of activity of one of the SIBs versus the other. They looked at their MRI scan, some of our fancy scans that we have, and what they found was signs at the age of 8, 9, and 10 of early Alzheimer's disease in those morbidly obese children. Now, there's a tie-up. Most recently, we're learning that obesity, poor functioning in school, poor grades, and ADHD are very intertwined. In fact, we're learning more and more about the addictions and how eating can be an addiction. It certainly is for somebody morbidly obese. It's sort of taking in, craving and craving, the same way any addiction takes hold of us. Well, we know that ADD people are twice as vulnerable to become substance abusers, twice as vulnerable to becoming addicted to video games, to all the drugs on the street, to alcohol, and to food. We're just finding that association, looking at the brain and seeing it's the same network that is involved. We've known a lot about addictions for a long time. We know the characteristics in the brain. We know that it's involved with the dopamine system. And there are 50 recent publications in the past 3 or 5 years linking ADHD and obesity. That they're very, very along the same path. They share the same pathway in the brain, as I say. And it's a problem. It's a big problem that we have, and we need to pay attention to that. So it's part of the crisis that we're dealing with, and also this crisis, you can see these guys coming with the straitjacket there to try and get this addicted gamer away from his gaming set. And it's a huge problem, not just with our ADD kids and our LD kids. This video game problem, it's a problem all over the world. I just came back from Taiwan and South Korea, where video gaming is a huge problem. That's the only free time the kids have. That's what they're doing. They're completely into that. And and you'll hear a little bit about Taiwan later, but Taiwan and South Korea are when we look at their children and how they do on test scores, they come in number 1, number 2, number 3 in the world in science and math all the time when they're tested. But they're spending almost all day in school studying or in front of the video games. And what they also lead us on is more of their children are depressed, and South Korea has the highest suicide rate in the world. It jumped ahead of Japan, as Japan has become more, have integrated play and exercise a little bit more back into their lives. So, as I say, ADD's problem really can lead to addictions. And this is something that we worried about a lot with my dog Jack, because he was prone to addictions. And so whenever I would go away, I made sure that the dog walker ran Jack every morning and every evening, or he would get back into his old ways, which unfortunately when the dog walker didn't show up, this is what I came home to. So it has to be a constant battle. Now, just to throw a scare into us boomers, just to show you what we know now and how tied in being healthy is to good brain health, being physically healthy is. This is looking at a big study where they looked at a group of 77-year-olds, and they divide them into obese, overweight, and normal weight. They did these fancy scans, and they found that those people who were obese at the age of 77 had 8% less brain volume than the normal weight controls. If you were overweight, it was 4% less brain volume. And if you were 77 and were obese, your brain looked like a 95-year-old person's brain. So you know that our brain changes as we age, so it's not being in an optimal state of health and fitness is a way to get your brain aging quicker. And a lot of our work in the world of exercise really started in the mid-90s when we were looking at aging. We were looking at the loss of cognitive function. A big MacArthur finance study, international study, looked at what were the preventive activities or what was protective against cognitive decline in Alzheimer's disease. And they came up with 3. The first was caloric restriction. That is, not eating, overeating, or just being at your ideal weight. The second was continuous learning. And the third was exercise. Now, exercise was so much the what we call robust finding. It was the most important finding, and it had an effect on lowering heart rate, lowering blood pressure, lowering the risk of stroke, improving blood supply to the brain, all that. But when they factored that out, it was still one of the big factors of preventing the aging brain from occurring. So this led to a fellow out in California, Carl Kopman, to do a study to say what was going on. So he got a bunch of mice and he trained them on the hamster wheel, and they ran around the hamster wheel. Before he started this, they did their mice SATs, and they had the brothers and sisters in another cages, and they didn't have the running wheels. 8 weeks later, they repeated the SATs. The mice that were running scored 20% better than themselves at the beginning, and their brothers and sisters who didn't get any better. So this was a big deal. Now, what they did, they were able to open up their brains and look at them. You can't do that with human subjects yet. But what they found was their brains were thicker, their cortex were the top part of our brain was much more colorful, thick, much more connected. And then one specific part of the brain, the hippocampus, was much bigger than their controlled siblings. And what he also measured was this little factor called BDNF, or brain-derived neurotropic factor, and it's very important. We had just discovered it maybe 7 or 8 years before. And he measured the amount of BDNF in their brains and the brains of their matched controls. And he found that it was 4 times higher in the running mice. Now, it's an interesting story about the mice is that once he trained them to run in these hamster wheels, they did it on their own. Every night they ran 4 kilometers on average, because they're nighttime animals, right? So you compare that to the rats, because then they've got into rat studies, right? You can't have rats run on running wheels, they're just not big enough. So we have now rat treadmills. You can get them from Nike and places like that. But rat treadmills, and if you teach a rat to run on his treadmill, by the end of the first week, they're running 8 to 10 kilometers a day on their own. And one study at week number 10, they are running anywhere from 18 to 20 kilometers a day because they like it. Now, BDNF was christened by me and others as Miracle Grow for the Brain, because BDNF is brain fertilizer. And we make BDNF in all of our brain cells when the brain cells are acting. So when you're learning something, your BDNF goes up. When you're moving, it goes way up. In fact, there's nothing that makes this BDNF go up more than exercise. So if you want to make fertilizer for your brain, you got to move. And the more you move, the more of this stuff you make. And the more it impacts our cells to keep them young, to keep them working right, to help prepare them to do what they have to do for us to learn, which is to grow. That's the magic. In the past 10 years, we've had 3 Nobel Prizes given because we've learned what learning is in terms of what happens in the mechanics of the brain. Our brain cells have to grow, to log in, to encode. We used to use all these words to really cement in anything that we've learned. Our brain cells have to grow and change. And the environment is queued up by this miracle grow. It's become very, very important. So quickly go over this, but that one study started a tsunami. It was a tsunami that has been started since 1995. Before 1995, there might have been 8 to 10 studies a month on how exercise affects the brain. Now, I get 40 new abstracts every week from the National Library of Medicine on how exercise is affecting the brain. People are studying it all over the world. Whole departments of neuroscience are looking at how exercise is affecting our brains. This is from a study looking at elderly, age 60 to 79, and includes me, and they were all sedentary. They divided the groups in half. One half did stretching and toning. The other half walked, brisk walk, got their heart rate up to 70%, 75% of their maximum every day for about 40 minutes. They did elderly SATs pre and post after 6 months. The SAT scores went up about 11% on a fairly large group. And what they found when they looked at their scans, because that's what we do these days, is that these areas, the blue, the yellow, areas of and this is a picture, the summation of the picture of the adults that were walking now, that were moving, those parts of the brain indicate brain growth. So their brains actually grew in 6 months and grew fairly enough to be impactful, to be very significant. So you can change your future by exercising. Now, we've begun to look at this finally. Now, I want to say this. All the interest was on preventing Alzheimer's and cognitive decline back at first, because that's where the money was. You know, we knew this was going to be a problem as we boomers are approaching that age. And we really haven't had much work done with kids like we have with the elderly, but we're starting, and it's coming in rapidly, and we're finding very similar findings. So this is a sample of children at the age of 11, I think it's 11, maybe 8, but anyway, they're looking at about 50 of them, dividing them into 2 groups, those that were fit on a running test and those that were unfit. That's the only difference. And they did their version of the SATs, and the fit kids did better than the unfit kids, which is a consistent finding by a significant amount. But then they looked at their brains, too. They looked inside their brains. This is the area that, oh yeah, good. So this area here, the blue and the red there, is what is the hippocampus. This is sort of central station for learning in our brains. Well, the fit kids, those that were fit at the study, this part of the brain was significantly larger than the unfit kids. Just by being fit, their brains, this important, crucial part of the brain for learning, was bigger, more ready to take in information. And they also looked at other parts of the brain that are involved with learning, and those in the fit kids were again a little bit bigger. They had a little more brain volume. And we think that this might be related to them being better able to learn, better students, perform better on tests, etc. This, unfortunately, is the way we think about fitness. It's something to schedule in, and we have to do that because our lives are so complicated, and really, they're so easy. You know, oh, we were working hard, we're much more stressed, we're worried about our 401k becoming a 101k, all that kind of stuff. You know, we have all those stresses and worries. So we have to work, or then we have to go home and watch people exercise. You know, watch UNC versus NC State this weekend, you know, the tailgating is a lot of exercise, I guess. But, or you watch your favorite football or basketball team, you know, that's really not exercising, no. No, raising your heart rate is pretty good when you're excited or when you're depressed or when you want to kill the coach or one of the players, but it's not the kind of exercise, not the kind of activity that we were made for. We're made to move, and we're not doing that today. This is a typical ADHD child, and I got into this, the combination of both exercise and ADD at the same time. Because I did my training up in Boston at the beginning, in the middle of the beginning of the Boston Marathon craze in the mid-70s. Everybody was running. Everybody was marathoning and training. And when I began practicing, I saw a lot of people who had to stop running because of a bad wheel, a bad knee, or bad ankle, or bad hip. And all of them got depressed. Almost all of them. So I was beginning in 1982 to be interested in hyperkinesis of childhood that was lasting into adulthood. That's what it was called back then. Then we called it ADD after that, thankfully. But I was interested in seeing this in some of my adults, and I was talking about it at a party, and this very esteemed professor from both at MIT and Harvard, a MacArthur Fellow, somebody had written a whole bunch of books in the very scholarly areas, called me and said, I need to come see you. Because he had been a marathoner all of his life, across country in high school and junior high, and then a runner. And he was brilliant, and he had accomplished and produced a lot of material. But he had to stop running because he hurt his knee, and he got depressed. The depression was treated, but he came to me because he was showing signs of this attention deficit disorder. He wasn't able to get to his work. He was procrastinating. He was getting angry. He was losing his temper. He never called his friends back. All these things had not been part of his life before. So he was really using his exercising, his 8 miles a day that he knew to the second how much he ran each mile every day. He was using that to self-medicate. And so that began my interest in ADHD. Ned Hallowell we were working together at the time and started talking about it, and we began to think about this in terms of all of the problems with ADHD. And then we began to see it in our ADHD patients. If they were moving, if they were continuing to move and did sports or exercise in one way or the other, they were much better because of it. Now, they might still need treatment with medicine. For some people, it's not enough. But for many people, it is. It is. And so that fellow really sort of turned the tide for me and led eventually to some papers and then a book Ned and I wrote together with on Driven to Distraction. And it also kept me very interested in exercise. You know, exercise we knew was good for mood. We knew it was an natural antidepressant. We knew it lowered your stress levels. But we also knew, Ned and I, and others now, knew that it turned on the attention system. Because the attention system is a big part of the movement system. Because if we're moving correctly, we're going to attend correctly. So that led us to always, always, always prescribe exercise. And it's one of the things we're talking about at lunch with people. What happens, we see a lot of kids coming into college, for instance, who were first diagnosed with ADHD. Because when they were in high school, one, they had a mom. Two, they were exercising. And a lot of kids come to college and they stop, either because they're not playing sports or they just stop. And not only do they get the freshman 15 or 20 or 30, what is it today? I don't even know. 500, no, it's not. They gain weight because of their inactivity, okay? And they also show up with ADD because they stopped exercising, or their ADD finally showed itself. The complexity of the work certainly is harder, and the lack of structure, of course, is so much greater. So it's a very big time for us when we see people with ADD come to us. Anyway, this is another brain picture and tries to show in a very splat kind of way what our attention system looks like. It runs all over the brain, everywhere, from the awake button to the emotional centers up into our frontal cortex, which is where our executive sits. Well, exercise is needed by all these centers. And when you're moving, you're using these centers. So you're turning on something that might be a little bit off. And this is just a cartoon of what the attention system looks like. Where this is the on-off button in our brain, way down, where we're asleep or awake, then up through the limbic system, our emotional centers, motivation, and up into our more cognitive thinking centers of the brain up top on our cortex. Now, one thing we've learned recently about ADD and about dyslexia and about autism, we learned this the first actually about autism and Asperger's, is that there's another part of the brain that's not mentioned much, that we only started paying attention to 20 years ago in terms of something other than its job in helping us be more coordinated. And that is a part of the brain that sits underneath here. This is the development of our skull over 4 million years. And as you can see, the front part of our brain grows, as well as this back part underneath here, the cerebellum. Now, the cerebellum, before 1990, we thought of as something that we just used to pass the heel-to-toe test on the side of the road. I have to lay off the sauce. Anyway, to pass the heel-to-toe test, to be coordinated, we thought it was only about motor skills. Well, now we know that it's very much involved with attention, with social skills, with reading, with learning, with emotion. It's very much involved because this part of the brain grew along with our front part of the brain. So our back part grew as well as our front part. And we know that it's important now. And we found a lot of studies have been done, a lot of news reports about how important this is for attention deficit disorder. Studies come out looking at its importance for dyslexia and reading problems. and and how it's so connected to this front part of the brain, which we'll get to in a while, or the frontal cortex, prefrontal cortex, the executive. And what our cerebellum does is, I call it the rhythm and blues center of the brain. It keeps time. It keeps things continuous. It keeps our attention going and makes us have a continuous flow of attention. And when it's off, you get problems. You be herky-jerky. You aren't coordinated. Well, and the reason why it's so exciting, actually, is because the cerebellum is very trainable. Very trainable. You can train your cerebellum to get better easier than you can the rest of the whole brain, because the whole brain is very, very complicated. But a third of our total 100 billion brain cells reside in our cerebellum, and they're always working all the time, changing, shifting, changing, and they're able to grow very easily. So when you do yoga, when you do Tai Chi, when you do Pilates, when you do balance of any sort, balance training of any sort, you're training your cerebellum. You're causing growth to happen there, and you're improving your balance, but you're also improving a lot of your higher brain functions. The whole door movement, which is come and gone in the United States, which was a way of looking at the cerebellum and trying to exercise the cerebellum intensely in a way to, at first was just brought on board by Mr. Dorr to help his daughter's dyslexia in England. Those centers have come and gone because it was so expensive to do, and the results were minimal in some areas and good enough in others. But we know we can train it, we can change it, our balance can get better. The Wii Fit, for instance, is probably the best balance trainer I've ever seen. Now with the new ones coming out at Christmas time, none of us have an excuse because there's all kinds of different stuff coming. Because it can really help you regain your balance, not just motorically, but for the attention system, for the learning system of the brain. And these are the tools. Doing something like jump rope, or training really in the gym with the Bosu ball, or using the balance board. These are all ways of training up your cerebellum. And as I mentioned, yoga and Tai Chi, dance, any coordination challenge will challenge your cerebellum and push it to grow. And as you can see here, in one very large study out of Europe, 1/3 of the children diagnosed with ADHD had significant coordination problems. Okay? We know that that's the case with LD, and certainly with Asperger's and autism. The percentages are much higher. And so by training the balance, you can have an impact on those problems. And this is more news about the cerebellum, that we know that it's important, and we didn't know this before. We know this is an area that we can train and make a difference. Now, I'll be talking a lot about exercise from here on, and starting off with, though, one study out of Germany just recently, looking at average, very fit high schoolers, where they had them take a test, then had them exercise for 10 minutes. One just aerobic exercise. The second group was aerobic plus coordination challenges. So they got their heart rates up, which you'll find is very, very important, to stimulate their brains, to stimulate brain growth. And then they did the test again. These are pre and post tests, the pre-test, post-test here. And this is just with the speed on their answers went up in both samples, But those that had the coordination challenge, along with being aerobic, improved more. Similarly, in test of attention, if they had that coordination challenge, their scores went even higher, and they made less errors. Both groups did better when they exercised. But those that also had the coordination challenge, so this is where sport comes in. Soccer, basketball, those kinds of sports where there's a coordination challenge. And the best one is dance. Dance. And that's always a surprise to people. That is probably one of the best ways to treat learning problems. Okay? The people up at British Columbia, UBC, up in Vancouver, one of the leaders in the field of neuroscience, Adele, not Adele Simmons, anyway, a woman up there who's been one of the people that I've followed in writing about the frontal cortex and the executive function, has really been studying and saying the best exercise you can do is to learn to dance. And she's talking about not just ballroom dancing, but really vigorous dancing, as well as other kinds of dancing, because you have to be coordinated. And you have to, I mean, the best way for us to have our brains grow is to have our heart rate up and our parts of our brain even challenged even more. And this is what I wanted to, why I wanted to talk about that here. Now, this area of the brain is the prefrontal, or the last part of our frontal cortex that grows. And this is a part that's involved in all of our executive functions, the part that grew last, that we evolved into. And this is the part that's involved with sequencing, with planning, with organization, with putting the brakes on our impulses. It's where our working memory is. I like to say that's where our RAM chip is stored. And this is the part that helps us maintain our focus and screen out irrelevant information. Now, one thing we know with ADHD children and adults, this part of the brain isn't always on. It's a little bit sleepy. And Ned Hallowell and I used to talk about ADD as the problem of the sleepy cortex, the sleepy prefrontal cortex. It needs woken up by excitement, by interest, by challenge, by competition, by exercise, by our stimulant medication, by having the final day the papers due actually tomorrow, to sort of pierce through the procrastination. And this part of the brain is always affected by exercise. In all the many studies that we have in animals and in humans, we see this part of the brain turned on. And as I back a while ago showing you about adults and aging, that's the part of the brain that grew. It actually grows in response to activity, exercise. And this is just looking at all the studies that have been done at looking at this part of the brain. Lots and lots of studies to support this notion of the CEO being turned on by exercise, being helped to be better, be tougher, be stronger, to help us take in information, parse it, understand it, sort it, call up memories. And one thing that happens, these guys, they were out on their second date the night before, and she has a little bit of ADD, hadn't had her exercise in yet, and can't remember his name. So more and more studies are showing that if we have enough activity that our working memory, which is what this is meant to represent that's not working so well, gets better. We expand it. We have more RAM to hold in our new information coming in. And I have to mention this too. We actually have studies now, and one of the questions will be, well, what about strength training? And what about yoga and Tai Chi and all that? Because you'll hear some of the wonders of what we know about aerobic exercise. Well, strength training, first of all, the reason why we don't have as much data, although this is from a study from UC Greensboro, UNC Greensboro, sorry. It's hard to get mice to lift weights. And it's very difficult to get them into a yoga pose. Very, very difficult. So we don't have the animal information, and we're just starting to get human subject information, which shows in almost every study that strength training compared to aerobic training is a little bit better in every category. Just a little bit, some more than others. Mood changes, stress changes, ability to deal with stress, anxiety changes, attention differences. This is about executive function, where strength training was useful in this sample. It is, but it's not quite at the same level of aerobic activity. Now, something like curves. Anybody go to curves here? Okay, just a couple. Well, it's a circuit weights, right? You're lifting weights all the time, building your muscles up, but you're moving pretty quickly through. So your heart rate is probably in an aerobic level. Maybe it's 60-65% of your maximum heart rate. You're getting a lot of activity in your brain in both the weight training as well as the aerobic training, and that makes your brain grow. Because one thing we know about our body's cells is that they like to be used. We have this phrase in neuropsychiatry and neuroscience called use it or lose it. If you're not using it, it's going to be taken in and used for something else, and that's why we see this erosion at times. So, but if you're using your brain and you do when you're exercising, you're using your brain almost to full capacity. Your cells all over your brain are involved in action, in observing what's going on outside you. So you're pumping your brain full of neurotransmitters, you're making your brain cells work, and you're building more of these growth factors that help sustain the brain cells as they are and prevent their decline and their eventual erosion. Now this is my boy Jack again. He's very good when he's playing, and one of the areas that I've been very fortunate to become involved in since on my journeys all over has been learning about play, the power of play. It is very powerful, and it's powerful because it has an effect on our brain. We come into the world needing to play. Play is an essential nutrient. Okay, it's food for the brain. All mammals that have been studied play. When they're, especially the younger they are, the more they play. And if you withhold playing from animals, their brains are smaller. They do less well on their SATs. They don't fit in. they're more aggressive, and or they become the bullied. They don't have that emotional learning that play brings with it. And when I'm talking about play for humans, I'm not talking about video games, and I'm not talking about texting. I'm talking about interactive play, where you're getting your heart rate up and down, and you're moving your muscles, and you're learning skills, and you're cheating, but then you're corrected, and you lose, and you get back up. Kids today don't get back up anymore. Parents are the helicopter parents, and we're all guilty. It's not like this is something new. We all want to make everything right, and we don't allow our children to fail as much as they need to. But on the playground, we used to fail all the time, but you got right back up to try again, and kids today aren't doing it. Now, there's a whole big corporation called Playworks that's like an organization funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to hire recent college graduates to go around to playgrounds in certain cities to teach the kids to play. I'm serious, because there are many. You ask some of the elementary school teachers, these kids come in and they don't know how to play. They don't get it. Why? Clickers. The video games, the TV, their interactive play experience is very, very small, and it's very important that we pay attention to it. Plus the fact that in our schools, recess is almost gone. In most schools, I don't know whether it's like down here in North Carolina, but certainly in Massachusetts. Why? We have to study. We have to push the kids to do better on the tests. First it was No Child Left Behind, now it's race to the top, right? It's race to the top. And it's just and what are we doing? We're teaching our kids to be better test takers and to teach to the test, as opposed to thinking about allowing the teachers to do their job to help educate the child to grow as they need to grow. And so they're taking away recess time. They've taken away art and music, and they've certainly taken away PE time a lot, very much. But play is something we need to remember. It's very important because we actually know where the play circuits are in the brain. We know the neuroscience of play and joy, or we're beginning to. And they're very primitive. They go way back. And this book by Stuart Brown sort of captures the effect of play on brain and brain development. But nothing really cemented it for me as much as this YouTube video, 2.5 minutes or so, of a situation where this fellow up in Manitoba, Canada, had a new bunch of huskies that he wanted to get pictures of at twilight. So he brought a photographer out to take pictures of these brand new huskies. They were out there. They were going to camp there for a week or so, which they do up there. First night, however, in comes, rushing into camp, this 1,200-pound male, starving polar bear. They knew the polar bears in the area hadn't eaten for 4 months because the ice floes hadn't closed. They hadn't been able to get to the seal pups. So both the photographer and the owner thought it was dinner time for the polar bear. But this guy here, this husky, who was said to be the dumbest of the group, instead of being afraid, instead of getting fearful or getting aggressive, decided to get in the universal play position, which is downward dog, back bowed, tail up, wagging, head up, mouth open, fangs covered. inviting the polar bear to play. Sort of stopped the polar bear a bit, changed his hair went down, his face got soft, and this is what happened. So, and you can see that every night this polar bear came back to play, and it generalized it to the rest of the husky pack. So, and as I say, we know that there are play circuits in our brain that need to be activated, and especially when we're young, but all through our lives. And the sad news is, of course, is that we're losing recess. We're losing recess, which is the normal playtime. This study came out of a medical school, Department of Pediatrics last year. And when am I supposed to take a break? I don't know. Now? Okay. You have to tell me because I have no time sense. One of the symptoms of ADD, no time sense. No matter how much medicine you're on, no matter even if you're a triathlete, no time sense. But anyway, let me just finish up, and it's a perfect time to stop, or to have a break. We've taken recess away, and so this Department of Pediatrics studied recess and how much time kids were spending in recess, grades 3 and 4, 13,000 kids over a 2-year period, all kinds of different areas of the country. And what they found, in a nutshell, is that 30 minutes a day seemed to be the tipping point. If they had 30 minutes a day, split up into 3s or 2s or just one 30-minute period, that seemed to be enough to improve their performance in school, to improve their comportment or the ability of the teacher to redirect them. But it was really important. Less than that, the kids were unruly. The kids were more difficult to have them pay attention. And what really got me, and I loved in this big study, was the finding that the best recesses were those with the least equipment. Because the kids had to make up those games. They had to think for themselves. And I've traveled all over and looked at recesses and saw, ones that had all this bric-a-brac and all kinds of stuff that parents go, we need to get all kinds of good play stuff. Well, when you see a group of second graders come run out for their recess, they maybe run through that house and up and down the slide and everything. But then, what do? They gather together, and they're playing foursquare, they're playing soccer, they're playing tag, all that, because they want to interact. It's a natural kind of thing. And they learn from that. We learn from that. Our brain grows from that. And we laugh and we enjoy. And we get all that benefit for our brains to grow and be better. So it's something that we really need to rethink how we're focusing so much on test scores. Because what you're going to hear is that by making the learner a better learner, test scores go up. Okay, that means taking time away from reading, writing. The sitting time. So we'll take a break now.